The Evil Dead 2013 is rad. And I'm not just using rad as a synonym for great there. I mean it's like actually rad. And all the specific connotations of that word. It is the exact kind of fist-pumping, gnarly, sick as hell vibe that the word rad conjures up when used to its fullest potential. It is so rad that it's practically a YouTuber who specializes in 3D platformer games and survival horrors. And it's not just rad, it's also metal, groovy, unreal, and all of the words we use that mean a very specific kind of fantastic that's pulsating with the energy that makes you go, dude, shit goes so hard. Evil Dead 2013 is rad. Not all remakes and reboots are created equal. The horror genre is one that's more familiar with the remake and reboot territory than most, but in amongst those releases, I'd say you get more stinkers than absolute gems. While the latter is not unheard of and is in fact becoming more common, the former is the thing that we see the most of. You see, there's an inherent problem with creating either a remake or a reboot in the first place. On paper, making what was once old new again doesn't sound like a bad idea. But then you have to ask, why remake any property? And the answer is because it has an already perceived value. And this is where the problems arise. Nobody out here is in discussions to remake or reboot The Bye Bye Man. Or, I don't know, Fear.com, whatever the hell that was. Because no one cares about those things. There's no money to be made there. But there is money to be had in remaking, say, Nightmare on Elm Street. Or Poltergeist, because people are interested in those ideas and those worlds and those stories in arguably substantial enough numbers that they dip their heads in for a new visit to them. But the thing is, it's a catch-22. If a film is loved enough to warrant discussions of a remake or reboot, then that's because the original already exists and did something well enough to warrant that love. So you're having to compete with that pre-existing adoration. And you're already starting on the back foot. You're literally beginning production with heavy competition. Competition that you are not distancing yourself from, but actively asking to be compared to. Even if your movie is good, every single facet of it is going to be compared and contrasted with something that already exists. And when you get to the fandoms, oh boy, the fandoms, they are going to examine that shit with a microscope. It is so hard to actually stick the landing on a remake. Make it too similar, and it's like, why even bother? This was already good and likely better the first time. Why does this version even exist? Make it too different, and it's like, why even calling this the same thing? There's nothing about the thing we love in here, and the promise of that being present is the whole reason you told the audience to buy a ticket. Reboots, similar deal. People for the most part would rather their old beloved franchise didn't have to die to make way for a studio puppeteering some kind of Frankenstein-like amalgamation of its flesh saying, but look at me, I'm good too. God, wouldn't you have rather have had Del Toro's Hellboy 3 than whatever the hell that 2019 thing was? I'm still mad about that. So I'm giving you all this preamble just to stress how fine the line is that you have to land on in order to make these things work. Which is exactly what makes it so truly remarkable that Evil Dead 2013 is perfect. Like, it is just flawless at doing what it does. It doesn't just land right down the middle of that line, being different enough to warrant its own existence and being interesting in its own right, while still feeling somehow spiritually like the most Evil Dead film you could make without just having Raimi and Campbell show you the first film again and pretend it's a new movie. It dances on that line. It makes parading along that line look easy. God, I adore this movie. Directed by Uruguayan filmmaker Fede Alvarez, who also co-wrote the film with Rodo Sayagues in the two's feature effort debut, Evil Dead 2013 tells a very similar tale to the 1981 Sam Raimi original, but in such a way as to be the perfect example of, it's not the story you tell, but rather how you tell it. If you compared the basic plots of these two movies, it would be like an extremely hard game to spot the difference. There ain't nothing in there on the surface level you haven't seen before. Both films are about a group of young people who go to a cabin in the woods where they find the Necronomicon. A big, scary, evil-looking book that practically has a stamp on it that reads, Do not read from me. I definitely summon demons. Then one of these dinguses reads from it and it summons a demon. One who takes possession of different members of the cabin, and the remaining survivors can't flee because of supernatural obstacles that have trapped them in their environment, and so whoever is left around has to kill their possessed loved ones or become the demon who's possessing them's next victim. It's a pretty cliche setup, to be honest, so much so that Cabin in the Woods has become kind of shorthand for conventional horror setting, to the point that there's literally an entire film with that title explicitly made to satirize and examine horror tropes. It's as familiar a concept to the wider public these days as Monster Under the Bed. Like, I don't think you could make a film called The Cabin in the Woods and not have it be a horror. No one's going to see a drama movie with that title. It's a horror title. The iconography it mentally conjures is far too tied to the idea of horror now. But cliche now it might be, that's only because the original Evil Dead was so damn good and had such a cultural impact that many were influenced by or straight up copied this formula. Always tweaking it slightly. In The Strangers it's serial killers, not demons. In Cabin Fever it's a virus. In Cabin in the Woods it's Evil Dead but meta. But this was a unique concept at one point. This was originally a film that at the time of its initial release, Stephen King once called it the most ferociously original horror film of the year. And in the year 2013, when its remake dropped, the formula may have seen its fair share of imitators, fresh takes and blatant rip-offs that maybe took a little bit of a shine off of that and made this kind of setup feel a little stale and tired by modern audience and sensibilities. We can still definitely give Alvarez's take on the material a pass, as the back-to-basics storyline really helped in giving it that Evil Dead identity, and his execution of this basic premise felt so fresh at the time, it, at least to me, didn't feel formulaic at all. With everything used to craft this movie's visual style giving it such a unique feeling of its own. It may have used the 1981 plot, but its tweaks to this narrative and its incredible visual identity made it feel, at least to me, as fresh and unique as that film felt to audiences back in 1981. Although admittedly, I can't be sure of that one. I wasn't even close to being born at that point. But you know, feels like a good thing to say. Again, to revisit the point of it's not the story, it's how you tell it, Evil Dead 2013 might have similar beats to the original movie, but execution-wise, they are entirely different beasts. Evil Dead, when it was released, was considered by many to be a very scary possession horror film. As time has went on, some of its more low-budget qualities and audiences' changing sensibilities have rendered elements of it with a greater degree of energetic fun and endearing kitschiness. But even from release, those elements of the movie were always there, front and centre, in what I think was a kind of totally intentional way. Of course, it's easy to say that with the benefit of hindsight, with both its Raimi-directed sequels even further embracing the camp and comedy elements of the franchise, and often even going into full-on levels of slapstick. Side note, this is not a bad thing, by the way. Evil Dead 2 is my favourite in the franchise. But even as early as that first quote-unquote serious film, there was always an element of camp to it. I mean, a tree commits a really violent and vulgar act in one of the most controversial and remembered moments of the movie. And like, yeah, that is really disturbing and graphic and exploitative in a way that Raimi himself isn't even happy with these days, calling it unnecessarily gratuitous and brutal, chalking it up to a bad decision made from being 19 at the time and not really thinking things through. But it's also a tree. Like a tree attacks somebody, regardless of the gross nature of the attack. It's kind of goofy. And like, the Deadites of this movie are super over the top, performing the violence with almost pantomime-like exaggeration. The spurts of blood and bile are excessively overblown. And again, this isn't a criticism at all. Like, this is just another ingredient that helps in making that film so special. In fact, I'm of the opinion that almost all horror, in order to really work, has to be kind of a teeny bit silly. But that could be a whole video in of itself, so let's not get into that thought rabbit hole right now. My point is, it's easy to see why the franchise went in the direction of embracing its sillier elements, because the ingredients for that evolution were always there to begin with, which is something that really helps Evil Dead 2013 stand out in its version of the telling of these events, because where the first film was filled with a lot of camp 80s fun, 2013 is instead absolutely brutal. The film is graphic and grimy and grounded, and all of the things I normally kind of think a lot of horror would honestly benefit from straying away from. Grungy texturing can often be used as kind of a crutch for horror to fall back on when creators don't really have a unique or interesting flavour of their own to bring. But here, it's done with such style that it totally works. To this day, I still think this is one of the slickest films I have ever seen. Visually, everything about this film feels menacing. The world feels at times lived in and dirty and dangerous, and then at other times like this super stylized hyper reality depicting a kind of hell on earth that many films going for a kind of grounded aesthetic would shy away from for being too out there. The colour palette switches from this 2000s horror movie dirty bronze aesthetic to sharp, high contrast visuals with well-defined blacks to these just incredibly striking flashes of deep, beautiful reds, and these changes are always done with deliberate intent that feels important to the point they're at in the narrative and heavily complements the action on screen. The good few tweaks that have been made to the basic plot as well further complement this identity the film has carved for itself. In this version of the Cabin in the Woods based antics, the cast of the movie aren't there for a vacation, but rather as a last-ditch effort to get their heroin-addicted friend, our leading lady Mia, finally clean. This being the film's catalyst as to why our main group of characters are in an abandoned cabin in the woods is not just a sensible explanation to move the plot along, but also helps with the film's whole presentation of being this kind of grittier, more realistic take on the material, as well as gives new compelling narrative elements to explore, such as Mia's strained relationship with her brother. Everyone there starting from a position of being more in conflict with one another from the get-go under the stress of waiting for Mia's inevitable resistance to this process adds new narrative stakes to the proceedings, as internal demons, not just the literal demons, are what needs to be conquered this time. And my god, is Mia fighting for her life in this movie, in more ways than one. Portrayed by Jane Levi, this woman is an absolute high point of this film, simply for how much she sells having just a completely terrible time. Like, this poor lass is having a bad few days at this cabin, my god. And Levi sells it like her life depends on it. She is so twitchy and aggy, it's like you can feel the fire under her skin from her stress and withdrawal, and she has the incredibly complicated job of not just playing one character in this film, but two, as she isn't only our leading protagonist, she's also our antagonist, as the main possessed character of the movie who causes most of the torment for the rest of the group. The way she deftly switches from this terrified, fragile, broken woman to an almost unrecognizable, self-mutilating, gleeful sadist to a determined, fearless survivalist is one of the best arc and performances in horror. I'm not even kidding. Give this woman her flowers, she's phenomenal. Between her, the new story, the visual style, the excellent direction, the effective tension and scares, and the brutal, unflinching practical gore effects that are so brilliant I can't even begin to show them or this video will be immediately demonetized, this would be an already incredible movie. And then the final act happens, and it becomes a perfect one. As if I haven't heaped enough praise on this thing already, I cannot in good conscience finish this video without celebrating its devastatingly brilliant closing section because, oh my god, very much at the point of spoiler territory here if that's going to bother you, but I mean, if you've seen it, you know, how can I not talk about this? Okay, so picture this. Very early on, the movie sets up this ticking clock element, not present in the original. The Necronomicon in this movie speaks of an end-of-the-world style scenario, where if the book manages to claim 5 souls, a creature known only as the Abomination will rise and destroy everything. As each of the group falls to demonic possession and death, only Mia's brother, the potential 5th soul, survives. Determined to save his sister from her current possession, he buries her alive, as the book states that being killed in this way is one of the only ways to kill the demon that now lives in her body, and after this, he digs her back up and attempts to resuscitate her. And although this seems like an initial failure, he's eventually successful. And with everything over, the two embrace, having killed the last demon that could claim this final soul. They reconnect and get ready to leave, put this nightmare behind them. It's a totally satisfying resolution. The main narrative conflict, besides, you know, obviously the demonic possession, was in how estranged these siblings had become. Mia struggling so much after her mother's death without her absent brother to guide her through it, that she just fell on increasingly hard times to cope with the pain. Her friends who were still around even telling her brother that they almost lost her to an overdose at one point. Her brother wasn't capable of fighting for her then, too scared to confront the hard problems himself, but here he is when it matters, facing a nightmare scenario even more impossible to deal with, and he doesn't leave his sister's side. He rises to the challenge and saves her now when he couldn't before. Their shared trauma and eventual reconciliation is the perfect silver lining to the horrible experience they've endured. It's emotional, it's rewarding, it's completely earned, and it's totally the right moment to take the audience into the credits. And then the movie goes, oh, you fucking thought! Boom! Possessed friend you forgot about comes out of nowhere, kills Mia's brother, takes the fifth soul, and the bowels of hell itself opens up as the clouds above rain blood from on high, leaving Mia soaked in red and alone and fending for herself against a relentless demon hellbent on the destruction of everything, starting with her in a roughly 20-minute long showdown that ends with one of the most incredible shots in the genre, and possibly one of the coolest shots in history as Mia stands defiant over the dismembered creature, the cabin burning ferociously in the background, the two of them soaked in a mist of downpouring crimson, and as the camera tracks down and tilts up, we watch them in beautiful silhouette as Mia angrily rams the chainsaw through the demon's skull. Holy shit, this goes so hard! My jaw legitimately dropped the first time I saw this. This is the perfect section to point to when I say this film is rad! Normally in these videos I like to dive more into the thematic elements and analysis of story and craft, and this film certainly has those elements to talk about, as I've already discussed with regards to its compelling use of colour palettes and its narrative parallels of real demons with internal ones through Mia's drug use, as well as the familial dynamics at play with her and her brother. That stuff is all here in this film. It's all really great, but it is so good at also just being supremely fucking cool that I had a hard time forcing myself to focus on anything else. If this video was just stream of consciousness rather than me having planned what I wanted to say, it likely would have just consisted of me rocking back and forth like a maniac, incoherently babbling, "You don't get it, you have to watch it, it's so awesome, it's so fucking awesome," and randomly gushing with no structure whatsoever about all the incredible high points this movie has. I wanted to spotlight this film in particular in the franchise rather than say revisiting that more iconic first film for a video, as well I know that those who have seen it tend to hold it in high regard. It's also probably the most forgotten in the franchise simply by virtue of not starring Bruce Campbell. And now, after this year, it can't even be considered the newest one because Evil Dead Rise dropped, which is also very good by the way. I just personally think that 2013 is just that little bit better. Add this one to my perfect movies list, and for those of you who are new here, I've had this discussion many times before, but perfect here doesn't mean this film is an objectively flawless movie. Hell, I can't even argue that personally, as I do think we could have done without the tree scene this time around, something that even the director agrees on, as apparently it was insisted upon by producers and not a decision he made himself, which is interesting. And if I was going to recommend it, I should probably give a heads up and mention that a dog does die in this thing in a rather cruel and brutal manner. I personally didn't get too affected by that, but I know that this will turn off quite a few people. So yeah, perfect here doesn't mean without fault. Perfect on the Drambles channel is a vibe. A movie that just resonates so hard with you that it feels made for you. A handcrafted piece of art that just scratches a part of your brain in a way that it permanently etches itself in the grey matter and sticks with you in a way that the mere mention of its existence makes you go, ah, yeah. Evil Dead is not just a great remake, reboot, or reimagining. It's a perfect movie in its own right. Did you know that Wholesome Halloween this year is being done in support of Trans Lifeline? 100% of ad revenue and my Patreon income for this month will be going direct to the charity, as well as all profits from the Dan Drambles shirt, available to pre-order this whole month at the link in the description. The final design will be a bigger screen print. This is just a mock-up, so you can see the gorgeous illustration we got commissioned. Other than that, in non-Trans Lifeline related charity efforts, there's some links in the description below where you can get 10% off the new In Search of Darkness movie, because this guy's creative advisor on the next one. Isn't that cool? I don't know if I've mentioned it yet, but you know, just throwing it out there can get you a little 10% cheeky discount. Check it out. And also this year I am once again running to be the face of horror, so if I am still in the competition by the time this video releases, check the link in the description below, and please, 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 Please vote for me using your free daily vote, and also you can buy more votes to spend in a day if you're so inclined, and if you do so, some of that money will go towards the B Plus Foundation, which is a charity that helps with children's cancer research. Other than that, I guess just comment, like, subscribe to my OnlyDance, hit the bell so you don't miss stuff. You know, the normal things. And I will see you all tomorrow.